Hello guys, it's Dmitry here, and today I would like to discuss about another really interesting topic. It's called closures in JavaScript. So it sounds like a fancy word, but reality is it's quite simple, simple core idea that exists in JavaScript. Of the concept, I would say, yeah, it's better like to approach it as a concept because it's more like a concept. So anyway, let's move on to this example. So you can see here I have two functions. The first one, I just call it outside function, and the second one I call it inside function. Guys, the most important thing to understand, and I already mentioned a couple of times about that the function that inside of another function, right? Or in this case, it's inside function. It's called inside function. This function is, it's going to, it's accessing. It can access any data that outside of the actual function, right? So essentially, for instance, this inside function can easily access this outside variable and everything that's outside of the actual outside function. So again, this function that inside, it has its own scope, right? Inner scope. But outer scope also available for this function, right? And all the data that exists outside, or information that exists outside of the actual inner scope of this function, it's accessible, to this function, for this function. So that's how it is, guys. And yeah, that's the main idea of these closures. So that this function can grab, for example, this variable, right, and can store it here. So, and yeah, can use it inside of its own scope. Guys, I would like to execute this piece of code, and I would like to show you what's going on here and why the concept of closures is quite basic, but it can be a bit confusing. Okay, let's call this outside function, right? Let's define const final result, and let's just call the actual outside function with variable, or with string that going to call, we will call outside variable. So guys, essentially now I'm going to call this function outside function, right? And I'm going to pass this string, which I'm going to call outside variable, right? So, and what will happen, this outside variable is going to be accessible by this function, inside function, right? So because this function can access the outer scope, right? So, and essentially that's why it can access this value, right, or value of this variable. So let's see. So let's run it, and essentially we will not see anything, I guess, but still we can run it anyway. So what I would like also to show you, then we can say final result, and we can pass inside variable string. So an idea is, guys, here we're returning this function, right? And this function, even it's already returned, this function like essentially we return this function, right? And remember guys, this function, it's grabbing this value, right? Or the value of the string. So, and even when we're returning this function and we passing it to, we storing it here, right? Or we passing it to this final result variable. This final result variable, it's going to contain this information about or this value, right? That was passed to this inside function previously, which is pretty cool, right? Kind of now this inside function, it's already outside of the scope of this function, outside of the scope of outside function. So, but still we can access this value, right? Because it was stored previously. So, and essentially now we're just going to pass this string to return function, right? And we should get to log out, right? We should get outside variable and inside variable. And let's run it. Let's see what will happen. So let's run now. Inside variable. Here we go, guys. You can see, right? Finally, I log out both of these console logs, and you can see we passed outside variable and inside variable strings, right? So that's the main idea of this closures, right? That even that first of all, that this inside function or this inner, like this function with inner scope, it still can access the outer scope, everything that's outside of it, right? All the data that's outside of the scope of this function, it's accessible for this function. So, and then even when this function is no longer existing here, right? Because previously it grabbed this data, the data is still going to be stored in return function, right? And then essentially we call in again this function, return function, and we just, because we still have this data, and we're passing the inside variable string. So, and essentially that's why we can log out both of them. And as a result, yeah, so that's how we came up with this result. Pretty simple, guys. Hope it didn't confuse you. I hope these namings, I try to come up with the right namings of these functions, because try to make them as obvious as possible. And I hope it wasn't confusing, guys. If it was confusing, please let me know in the comments, and I will try to come up with a new video about closures if you still confused. But I guess the explanation itself, I think it's quite trivial, and hopefully it made sense. I mean, obviously I try to explain the way I would make sense of that. Yeah. Thank you very much, guys. I covered everything that I was planning to cover in this tutorial. Guys, please like this video if you enjoyed, and please, guys, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, and if you're watching my video on a daily basis. And hopefully I will see you guys in the next tutorial, and goodbye, guys.